On launch day, I reviewed the RTX 4080 up against the RTX 3080 because, well, that's its direct predecessor, and it's offering a very disappointing price against that GPU, and you really hate to see that. However, in this video, I'm going to zero in on a different comparison point, which is the RTX 3090 Ti. This is the fastest GPU from the previous generation, so we're going to look at how much faster is this than what you could get if you bought the best of the 3000 series, what kinds of pros and cons might there be between the two, and then also, if you actually look at the new prices right now on these GPUs, these are fairly close price competitors. Well, and honestly, neither one of them is offering a compelling value. But since they are actually both, like I'm looking right now, they're in stock on NVIDIA's website, I can get a 3090 Ti for $1,100. And I can get a RTX 4080 in stock for $1,200, which means they really did not sell out. People have recognized the value proposition at this price is not great. You can see the 3080 at its $700 MSRP is definitely out of stock here. And the 3090 is even out of stock. But anyway, I don't know how well their website refreshes stock or whatnot. But you can see that definitely some GPUs here are out of stock, some are in stock. These are both available, and they're fairly close price competitors. Now, when you're watching my side-by-side comparisons, I do sometimes have people say that, one GPU looked more stuttery than the other. Keep in mind that you are watching a 60 frames per second video that's not variable refresh rate, whereas these GPUs were captured on variable refresh rate screens. So the GPU might have been captured at a different frame rate than what you're seeing in the video, leading to some stutter that wasn't there on the actual screen. Look at the frame time graphs that are available up here, and if you see spikes in the frame time graphs, that corresponds to what would actually feel like a frame rate stutter in the game. So the smoother those frame time graphs are, the better. Also in green there, we have the GPU usage percentage. We also have the VRAM usage, that labeled as memory. The CPU usage as a total, that'll usually stay low because I have a 32-thread CPU. And then there's the RAM usage also in blue. My overall system is the Ryzen 9 5950X CPU, 16 cores and 32 threads, so most games can't take advantage of a lot of those threads. And then we have 3600 CL16 memory, and I have 32 gigabytes of that. Let's jump into the head-to-head benchmarks, and I'll give you some final thoughts at the end. Let's start the benchmarks in Unreal Engine 5. Now, this is a little bit difficult to test right now because we don't have full games out there. So this is the Market of Light, which you can get on Steam, and it is a little playable demo game, but there's not adjustable graphic settings, and I can't use DLSS and things like that. So here we're seeing both GPUs falling well below 60 FPS at 4K. Although the lighting, the lumen here, nanite, letting you get really close to objects, everything about Unreal Engine 5 looks great here. And this is a cool demo to kind of check out, by the way. But again, without configurable graphic settings like we'd see in a full release game, I'm not sure this tells us exactly how these will play in new upcoming Unreal Engine 5 games, but so many upcoming games are going to be Unreal Engine 5. But we can at least get the performance difference here, which is about a 13% advantage for the RTX 4080, and doing it at significantly less power and temperature. Now, in this video, we'll also be looking at ultra-wide 1440p rather than 1080p, because I think it's a more realistic resolution to check. Now, both GPUs are getting much better frame rates now that we've gone over to ultra-wide 1440 instead of 4K. So I think we'd be a lot happier with this performance. But again, Market of Light, we have to be careful using this to represent full release games, that kind of thing. But the overall percentage difference in most scenes I looked at was about 15% advantage here for the 4080, so slightly increasing the lead with a lower resolution. But we'll take a look throughout the video if that continues to be the case. Now, looking at normal 1440p, again, both GPUs giving a good frame rate here, something you'd be much happier with. I'm also noticing the temperature difference between the GPUs, and these are both the Founders Editions, so this is a fair comparison between the two, model by model. But again, looking at the better performance coming at such lower power draw from the 4080, it's also leading to a much easier time cooling it. Now we're seeing 18% faster at 1440p, so it does seem to be scaling a little better as the resolution drops on the 4080. But now let's take a look at Plague Tale Requiem. We're starting out at 4K Ultra settings, and I'm using DLAA rather than TAA because as of the time of testing, the game's normal resolution slider got renamed to not have percentages, but it just had names like ultra quality and quality, and I wasn't 100% sure ultra quality was 100%. So I know DLAA is the full native resolution, although it is more demanding than the game's TAA implementation. So both GPUs would have a couple extra FPS here if you were using TAA. But like I said, I wanted to be sure we were testing the native resolution here before we upscale, because if I'm going to upscale on an NVIDIA GPU, I would use DLSS if it's supported, which it is supported here. So we see the 4080 about 13% faster, but neither one is getting a 60 FPS experience here. So it would kind of make sense to add in some DLSS comparisons. So if we kick on DLSS quality, the 4080 actually leads by 15%. And then the both GPUs are well above 60 FPS now. Now we're going to drop down to ultra-wide 1440p, and both GPUs are over 60 FPS, and the 4080 is about 13% faster. And we can also look at normal 1440p, where the 4080 is also about 15% faster, and both GPUs are giving healthy performance for this game. And this is a next-gen game that's very difficult for modern consoles to run. I even looked at 1080p given how demanding the game was. But modern consoles really only run this game at like 1440p, 30 FPS upscaled. They can sometimes climb to 40 FPS in a certain mode. Now, let's look at Cyberpunk 2077, because at 4K Ultra, this is still an incredibly demanding game despite being about 2 years old at this point. And, well, the 3090 Ti is representing the best we had from the 3000 series generation in terms of overall performance, maybe not best in terms of power efficiency or price or any of that, but overall raw brute power, the 3090 Ti actually can't deliver a 60 FPS 4K Ultra experience without image upscaling, whereas the 4080 can, and it is delivering it at significantly less power and significantly less temperature. So with all my criticism of the RTX 4080, and I think people are right to criticize it based on its pricing, well, it's not an earth-shattering performance jump over the 3090 Ti. I really do like to see it delivering it at such a lower power and temperature. If we could just do it at a significantly lower price, you know. But anyway, we are seeing it about 16% faster in this test, and it's doing it, like I said, at much lower temperature, which is nice to see. However, personally, in a first-person shooter, I would want to get higher frame rates than this. So here we're going to look at the 3090 Ti at the high settings with DLSS quality, and we'll also look at the 4080 with those settings on the far right. But in the middle, we'll look at just dropping down to 4K high instead of ultra, but leaving it the native resolution here. I don't, like, DLSS looks pretty good in this game, but I actually prefer not using it here. We're seeing a 20% jump, so that's a bigger jump than we saw without DLSS enabled, which is interesting. So maybe the 4080 has some improvements in its pipeline. Also, you notice we're skipping over a chunk of the benchmark now. We watched it all the way through the first time, but we're going to do a lot of tests here. Now we're looking at ultra-wide 1440p at the ultra settings native, and both of them are able to give good enough frame rates here that you might want to consider just using the ultra settings at native. And in this one, I only saw a 10% performance bump on my 4080, which is underperforming what I see in most of the other tests. So I'm not quite sure what happened there. But if we drop down to 1440p standard 16:9 rather than ultra-wide, again, they're both delivering a high refresh rate experience at 1440p ultra. And again, I don't think you'd need to use DLSS. Using DLSS in this game, like, there are a few things it does better than native, but a lot of the lines and tree branches and things like that I think look a little bit aliased. Anyway, we're at 19% performance jump there for the 4080, so back to more like normal what we were seeing. Not quite sure what happened with my ultra-wide test. Anyway, if we want to use some ray tracing though, this game gets even more demanding. So if you want to use RT ray tracing at 4K at the Ultra settings, the 3090 Ti has to go down to DLSS performance just to get around 60 FPS, and it does drop below it, whereas the 4080 could be at DLSS balanced, and if you go to DLSS performance, you get 23% faster than the 3090 Ti did, and you're more legitimately over 60 FPS more of the time. Now, really, if you're at 4K with ray tracing on these GPUs, you might not want to use all of the ray trace settings. Like maybe you just want to be at Ultra plus RT reflections instead of all of the ray tracing features. You could do that at DLSS quality on both GPUs and get decent frame rates. Whereas the 4080 could actually consider going up to RT Psycho, so that's the RT Ultra plus Psycho lighting with DLSS performance. And I'm not giving you a relative percentage here because none of these settings, well, I guess I could have. I could have given you a relative performance there. Well, I didn't. Anyway, we're at the Ultrawide 1440p here, and we're seeing the 3090 Ti at RT Ultra and the 4080 at RT Ultra, and neither of them are delivering a 60 FPS experience, so I tried kicking on DLSS quality on both of them. And the 3090 Ti does go over 60 FPS at times, but is below it at times, whereas the 4080 is more consistently over 60 FPS and giving you the kind of frame rates that you might actually be looking for in a first-person game. I know it's not competitive, but usually in first-person games you are more sensitive to lower speeds here, and we're seeing it 21% faster at native and 25% faster with DLSS. So we're still seeing DLSS outperforming the non-DLSS in terms of performance advantage. Now here we're looking at normal 1440p, where both could consider using ray tracing at the Psycho settings if you use DLSS quality. But I wanted to show the 3090 Ti just playing the game at native no ray tracing and how big of a performance hit it takes to do that. And the 4080 at native with RT reflections, we're seeing 26% faster in the like-for-like comparison there with RT Psycho and DLSS quality. Now, I also did want to take a look at 1080p here, just because the RT Psycho settings in this game, so this is RT Ultra with the lighting turned up to RT Psycho, is incredibly demanding, and I wanted to check if the 3090 Ti could do it. And it can deliver around 60 FPS, but it does drop below it at times. The 4080 is more consistently above that, but neither of these GPUs would normally be being used at 1080p, except for some odd circumstances. We're seeing a 25% lead here, though, at these settings. I know some people are super competitive gamers and have a 1080p high refresh rate monitor with these types of GPUs. But anyway, Forza Horizon 5 at the 4K extreme settings. The game has been updated a few months ago with temporal anti-aliasing, so I'm using that. I think it looks a lot more stable than the MSAA. And it also just recently came out with ray tracing in the actual driving mode rather than just Forza Vista. And I have turned that all the way up to RT Extreme. Also, I do have ResizeBAR enabled in my testing here, and I believe NVIDIA was recently updated to take advantage of ResizeBAR performance gains in this game. So here we're seeing both GPUs delivering an excellent experience, although the 4080 is certainly faster. Now, another thing I like about this benchmark is it tells you the percentage of the time at which you're GPU limited, because we actually can see the 4080's GPU usage drop below 99% at times. So we're seeing it here with a 29% advantage, but then only be GPU limited 58.8% of the time, meaning it could have done even better, which is interesting. I didn't go to lower resolutions because we were already GPU limited on the 4080. So here we're looking at Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. This game has ray traced reflections, which you can turn on from high to very high to ultra, and you can also turn on ray traced reflections on transparencies. Currently this is all set to maximum, and I'm showing you at the native performance level, both of them can dip below 60 FPS, but with DLSS quality, they're both giving you comfortable frame rates. Although DLSS, as usual, comes with some image quality pros and cons. When I actually played this game on my 3080, I ended up turning DLSS off at 4K just because I thought certain distant details didn't look quite as good with DLSS. Although in this scene we're looking at right here, I actually feel like the lines in the distance are looking clearer with DLSS on. Not really emphasizing my point. Also, this part of the benchmark is really easy to run, so I think it inflates the overall average FPS. So something to keep in mind when you look at the averages. I'm seeing 16% faster at native and 20% faster with DLSS. So we're consistently seeing a small improvement to the DLSS performance, it seems like, on the 4080. Now, in this test, we're looking at what if we just didn't use DLSS, so just normal 4K Ultra. They're both crushing it, giving really high frame rates. But on the 4080, I am also looking at what if I used ray tracing, but just used the reflections at very high instead of ultra and turned off the ray trace transparencies. Then we're seeing it actually deliver a pretty high refresh rate experience without DLSS. We're seeing the 4080 leading by 10%, but I think it's somewhat CPU limited at the native settings. And then you also see it compared against itself, like how much performance did it lose turning that ray tracing on. Here we're seeing 1440p. I'm not doing ultra-wide here because my benchmark didn't want to run in ultra-wide in this game. So anyway, normal 1440p. These are the maximum ray tracing settings, and I'm not going to test it without ray tracing here because they're both delivering such high performance without DLSS. This is native. With RT maxed out, that I think you would use it on both GPUs. There's no reason to turn settings down with frame rates this high. 19% faster, and again, it's a single player game, so those frame rates are completely fine. Now, let's look at an older ray tracing game. This is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and it has ray traced shadows, which you can adjust at various settings. I went up to the Ultra setting, but then there's the normal preset, which is called highest, that I'm using here. So we can see it, the highest on the right, and then highest plus the maxed out ray traced shadows on the left. At 4K, both GPUs are doing well, although the 3090 Ti drops to around 60 FPS or so at times with the ray tracing maxed out. Obviously, you could also use DLSS and combine that with the ray tracing to boost performance further. And without ray tracing, they both did really well. And we're seeing 24% faster and then even bigger jump with ray tracing enabled. At 1440p ultra-wide, we're once again seeing the highest and then highest with ray tracing. I guess I flip-flopped the left and right on how I did that for this test. Sorry, guys. But anyway, I think in this mode, you might as well kick on the ray tracing ultra in addition, because it seems like we've gained enough performance by dropping down from 4K that I think in a single player game, they're both delivering good enough performance at native with maxed out ray tracing that you might as well use it. Also mentioned the benchmark itself is actually much longer than the scene I'm showing you. This is the first segment of the benchmark. There are several more that actually are part of the test. We're seeing a 22% faster RT off and 26% faster RT Ultra. Now here we're dropping down to normal 1440p. And again, looking at both the highest non-ray traced preset and the highest preset plus RT Ultra. And again, the frame rates are so high here that I don't know why you wouldn't just crank up the ultra shadows, even if you find them to be barely noticeable. I mean, I'm not showing you a huge amount of the screen here in each one, but guys, I'm not convinced that ray traced shadows are particularly a mind-blowing use of ray tracing, especially for the performance hit that you get. But if your performance is already this good, then you might as well crank things up. Anyway, we're seeing 14% faster RT off and 28% faster RT on. There could have been some CPU limitation there with the frame rates that high, which is also exactly what we're seeing here in Spider-Man Remastered. So this is 4K at the very high setting, so that's not ray traced. And I'm just using the preset. It's hard to get an exact side-by-side swinging through the city, but I wanted to do swinging through the city here since that's what you spend most of the game doing. But I'm not going to give you a percentage difference here because the RTX 4080 is definitely being held back by the CPU. If you look at the GPU usage percentage, it's below 100%, very far below 100%. The CPU is not reporting 100% usage because games can't take advantage of the 32 threads that I have. So the threads the game can use are the limiting factor to performance here. This is with ray tracing, so the frame rates are lower because that's even more demanding on the CPU. Now let's drop to a DX11 game for some testing. So we'll look over at God of War. Now we'll look at it 4K Ultra, but we're also looking at it with DLSS quality enabled. So native resolution on the left, DLSS quality resolution on the right. And again, this is a DX11 game, so I thought it would be useful to throw some of that in there for testing to see if we saw any meaningful differences or anything like that. As he turns the corner here, this is more representative of actual gameplay frame rates. And we're seeing about a 13% advantage either way. This time I didn't see much of a difference between DLSS and native in terms of the percentage gain for the 4080. So I don't know if it's just handle difference in DX11 there, but I don't have other DX11 in my testing. Here we're looking at 4K ultimate settings in Horizon Zero Dawn, different Horizons here. And I was actually looking at the 3090 Ti here with DLSS quality enabled is actually able to perform faster than the 4080 at native, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then I also was curious if we were kind of CPU limited because I didn't see a huge performance difference between the GPUs here. But I only saw 9% gain. But I don't think it was much CPU limited because the DLSS did boost the frame rate, which wouldn't really happen if we were significantly CPU limited. Of course, there could be some CPU limits involved in certain scenes, and that's probably what was going on there. Anyway, here we're looking at Red Dead Redemption 2. This is at 4K. We're looking at the native at the preset slider. The overall graphics slid to the right side for favor quality. But once again, I was curious if the 3090 Ti could just kick on DLSS quality and then catch up to or surpass the performance of the 4080. And that does appear to be what's happening here. Now, DLSS in this game is a bit of a mixed bag. You get increased ghosting, and the hair doesn't look quite as good, but some of the TAA looks better, and distant details on trees look better. We're seeing about 13% faster when we're comparing native to native here, and DLSS was actually able to catch up and beat it. Here we're looking at the native performance at ultrawide 1440p, and I'm not going to bother with DLSS here, but honestly, using the DLSS kind of shows that I think the 4080 is like within DLSS range of the 3090 Ti, meaning performance-wise, it's almost like just kicking on DLSS quality. We're seeing a 17% lead here for the ultra-wide 1440p, and dropping down to normal 1440p. Both GPUs are doing really well. You can also see the GPU utilization is not near 99%, so we're probably seeing some CPU limitations at this frame rate in this game, and we're seeing about 19% faster in that test. Well, the benchmarks have shown that the RTX 4080 does deliver better performance, and noticeably so than the 3090 Ti, although not so much better that I think if you already have a 3090 Ti, it makes sense to upgrade to an RTX 4080. I just don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. Because, well, like in the screenshot we're seeing here, if I just Thanos snap myself out of existence, we're seeing that the 3090 Ti with DLSS quality enabled will often catch up to or surpass the performance of the RTX 4080 at native settings. Now, obviously the 4080 could then also use DLSS quality and gain its lead again, and it was interesting to note that it seemed like something about the new the DLSS pipeline of the two GPUs, and again, using the same, we're not talking DLSS 3 frame generation here, but just using the same pipeline, it did seem like the 4080 did have a slightly increased performance relative to the 3000 series, and I've seen that on my 3080 as well, so that does seem to be consistent when using DLSS. So interesting, but I guess what I'm saying here is if you already have a 3090 Ti, then the 4080 is not the upgrade that you're looking for. I think, you know, your 4090 you're waiting out, well, there'll probably be a 4090 Ti at some point. That kind of thing would be more interesting. Now, these are interesting GPUs to compare. For one thing, they're both sitting in stock on the NVIDIA website. I can find a 3090 Ti for $1,100. So while its MSRP was originally significantly higher than this, I think it was like $2,000, they quickly realized they couldn't actually sell them at that price for a sustainable period of time. So now they're sitting on NVIDIA's own website at this price, whereas the 4080 is coming in at $1,200. And again, despite me filming this video within a week, less than a week after the launch of these GPUs, they're still sitting in stock, which means that most people have voted with their wallet and realized that the 4080 compared to the 3080 is just honestly just terrible. It's just disgusting pricing. It destroys the joy of a new GPU launch, but I talked about that in my 4080 versus 3080 video. So if you're comparing these two GPUs, because maybe you are in the future and the price tag of the 4080 has been adjusted, but you maybe have a used 3090 Ti you could buy for an attractive price, right? So in other words, if you are comparing these head to head, I think that the 3090 Ti's only advantage is that it has 24 gigabytes of VRAM versus 16, and I think that is utterly irrelevant in gaming. I think that that might matter in some kinds of productivity. Oh, let me put it, I know it does matter in some productivity workloads, but my specialty and my reviews focus on gaming. So if you need 24 gigabytes of VRAM, then a 3090 Ti or a 3090 offer that, and the 4080 doesn't. But for gaming, I think 16 gigabytes is more than enough in any game situation that I've been able to test. And other than that, if we hop back over here to what we're seeing in these numbers, looking up there, we're seeing that the 4080 is delivering better performance, although not in a mind-blowing way, but the power consumption is just night and day difference. So the 3090 Ti is incredibly inefficient at its performance per watt, whereas the 4080 is delivering way better value in terms of performance per watt, which is really nice. That also makes it easier to cool. And these were both Founders Edition coolers that I was testing here. And we see the 4080 sitting under 60 degrees a lot of the time, whereas the 3090 Ti is frequently above 70 degrees. And also, you want to take your power supply into consideration. I am running both of these on a good quality 850 watt power supply without issues. But if you're below 850 watts, or you were maybe your power supply isn't of the highest quality, the 3090 Ti is probably going to give you more issues than a 4080. And so even if you're, again, in the future or looking at some kind of used deals on a 3090 Ti, performance-wise, it is pretty close to the 4080, but like I said, those energy consumption differences are certainly something to keep in mind. And then we have the 4080 offering some newer features, like we do have the AV1 encoding, which could be useful for streaming as services start to adopt support for that. It should look better at lower bit rates. And then also, it does have DLSS 3 frame generation, which, while NVIDIA really wants that to be a must-have feature, I think in its current state, it's more of a nice-to-have option that you won't use in many games, but you might use in some games. I don't want to rehash my full DLSS 3 frame generation review in every single video I do, but a quick recap. It does boost frame rates, but usually when you boost frame rates, like with normal DLSS or turning down graphic settings and things like that, it also increases the performance of the game, meaning the game has less input latency, which you would want in a competitive game. DLSS 3 frame generation inserts AI-generated frames that do not actually interact with the game engine in between real frames that are generated by the engine. And since you can't interact with the AI-generated frames, they do not increase the latency, the responsiveness of the game, but they do increase its motion fluidity at a small penalty to latency because the game has to delay showing you the real frame in order to insert the AI-generated frame. So there's a small latency penalty. In single-player games, I haven't felt the latency penalty to be a big deal if you're already starting at a baseline frame rate that's pretty high, and this just boosts you up even higher. However, the image quality has been more of a concern, where in Spider-Man Remastered, I did not like it. He moves very quickly over a lot of objects, and I think the AI has some trouble with that, and I see some weirdness around Spider-Man. But in a slower-paced game like Plague Tale Requiem, I actually did like it. I thought its image quality looked quite good. It's a slow-paced game where the latency was irrelevant, and it was nice to solve the motion fluidity issue on my 4K 120Hz screen. And so I did actually think it was useful there. And it was also useful because it can boost the fluidity of the frames in a CPU limited environment because the CPU does not need to help calculate those AI generated frames. So in other words, DLSS 3 frame generation is an interesting and nice to have feature. And I think in games that have it, it's worth trying it on for a while, trying it off for a while, and seeing what you prefer. Because like I said, in some games I liked it, some games I didn't. But in competitive games where your input latency is the primary reason why you want more frames, it doesn't help you with that. It actually makes it worse. So definitely don't consider it for that use case. But in general, I think DLSS 3 is a neat feature that's nice to have, and I'd like to see it improved upon, and I hope it does get improved upon. But I don't think it's a make it or break it, like buy this GPU over that for a huge amount of price increase. In other words, does it justify charging $1,200 instead of $700 for a 3080? Absolutely not. Anyway, overall, I'm hoping that the 4080 starts to become a more attractive option with some price decreases. I just hope we don't have to wait a long time to see that. And keep in mind, if you're buying a GPU right now, as of the time I'm releasing this video, we do have AMD's next generation coming out on December 13th. And they're claiming some attractive performance for a lower price versus cards like the 4080. And ray tracing performance, I'm actually interested to see how that matches up against the 3090 Ti, honestly. So stay tuned for those types of head-to-heads in the future on the channel. I hope all of you have an excellent day.